Welcome to this lesson video. Today we are looking at a linear function or linear graph. Let us start. First things first, we need to understand the general equation of a linear graph. Now y and x, we normally say these are variables, and then m and c, we call them parameters. Specifically, in detail, m is gradient, is the slope of the graph. Remember, linear graph is a straight line graph. So for the graph to go up or down, it depends on the sign of the gradient. And then c is what we call the y-intercept, or we also say it's a constant. Now checking the general equation against this equation, we can see that our gradient in this equation is 3. So the coefficient of x raised to the power 1 is our gradient, and then the number which doesn't have a variable is our constant c, or our y-intercept. Now you can see instead of y, we are using the notation of f of x. This simply means that we are labeling this equation or this function as f. So don't be confused, f of x is the same as y, which is our output. Let us look at another equation against the general equation. Before we can plot the graph or solve for the y-intercept and x-intercept, just make sure the given function, the equation of the given function, must be in standard form. What is the meaning of standard form? It means on the left hand side there must be our y, or our output, equals to everything to the right, starting with the term which has our gradient. So in this equation we can see this is not in standard form. We need to standardize. So the first thing that we need to do, we need to transpose this to the other side, and then we are left with 3y is equals to negative 6x plus 12. From here we divide by 3 throughout. So we are going to have y is equals to negative 2x plus 4. So this equation is in standard form. This equation, we cannot say 6 is the gradient. In fact, the gradient is negative 2. So just make sure before you do anything else, you put the equation in standard form. Suppose you are given this function and the question says sketch the graph or draw the graph on a Cartesian plane and clearly show all the x and y intercepts. Now what you need to know is that when you are given the function, before you can draw the graph, you need to do two things, which is the first one, you solve for x, whereby you will let y to be 0. By the way, this is x-intercept. And then you also solve for y-intercept, whereby you let x to be 0. Then from there you can plot the graph. So this is what we are going to do. We need a function, which in this case is this one, to draw the graph. Another thing which is important, you must know the behavior of the gradient. What are the effects? What are the effects of the gradient on the graph? So if the gradient is positive, just know that your graph will be ascending from left to right. If your gradient is negative, from left to right, your graph must descend. That is one of the things which are very important before we can draw the graph. Now let us start. To calculate x-intercept, we let y to be 0. So our equation, where we see y, we substitute by 0. So we can see that this is our y. So we have negative 2x plus 6. So it's 0, it's equals to negative 2x plus 6. And then we solve for x. We're going to transpose this to the other side, and then we have 2x, it's equals to 6. Then from here we divide by 2 both sides. we have x, it's equals to 3. So this is the x-intercept. And remember, x-intercept, it's a coordinate. Remember the order pair of coordinates, it's x and y. So what is our x value? It's 3. That is the first point. And then our y value, it's this 0 here. So it will be 0. This is the first point. We can say this is point A. We need to go ahead and calculate the y-intercept. For y-intercept, we let x to be 0. So where we see x, we substitute by 0. This is the equation. We can see that this is the x variable. So y is equals to -2, 0 plus 6. Y is equals to 0 plus 6, y is equals to 6. So remember the order pair is x and y. So it simply means the second point, which is point B, it will be 0 maps 6. Now you can see the reason why we say this term here, it's our y-intercept. Because by looking at the equation, if you let x to be 0, we are only left with this term, which is our y-intercept. So we just calculated x and y. We can now draw the graph. So we have our points and then we have our equation. Now by looking at the gradient, we can see that our graph will descend from left to right. Now we need to locate this point. This point is in which quadrant? We all know that at this point it's 0. Then all the terms to the right, actually all the values of x to the right are positive. All the values of y to the upward are positive. All the values of x to the left are negative. And then we have values which are negative for y. So we can see that our first point consists of a positive term and 0. Now it simply means that this point, which is A, it will be somewhere within this region. Now remember, this graph will not be drawn to scale. So what is important is to label your points and look at the slope of the graph. Also looking at this point, we can see that our y, it's on the positive side, which is within this region. Now we can see that, let's say this is point A, then this is point B. So our graph will be like this. We look at our next example. The given function is f of x is equals to 3x. So looking at this equation, we can conclude that the value of c is actually 0. So our y-intercept is 0. So to solve for x, we let y to be 0. And then this is y. So we have 0 is equals to 3x. We divide both sides by x is equals to 0 divided by any term, any number, the answer is 0. So the first point is 0 maps 0. For y, we let x to be 0. And then we have f of 0, which is 3, 0. F of 0 is actually 0. And then our second point is 0 maps 0. That is point B, A. From here we can go ahead and draw the graph. Now we need to draw the graph. You can see that point A and point B, both of these points are here, the origin. Now the problem is, it's either our graph will be like this or it will be like this. How do you know? We look at the gradient. Is it positive or negative? Remember, if it's positive, the graph from left to right will ascend. If it's negative, the graph from left to right will descend. So in this case, you can see that it's positive, so it means our graph will be like this. Our next example is a bit different. In this case, we are given the graph and then the question: determine the equation of the graph. Now, in order to answer a question like this, we need to understand the steps that we need to undergo. The first thing that we need to do, we need to determine the gradient. We need to calculate the gradient. Then the second step, we can simply use the linear equation to generate the equation, or we can start by calculating the y-intercept, which is our constant. And then from there we can conclude and give out the equation. 3 steps. Now, how do we calculate the gradient? We are going to use this equation, changing y over changing x. For us to use this equation, we need 2 points. We need 2 points on top of the given graph. For this particular example, we are safe because we have those 2 points. So it is simple for us to calculate the gradient. So we can simply plug in our coordinates. Now remember, x, this is xb, yb. Then this is xa, ya. So we have m, it's equals to yb, it's 0 minus x, actually ya, it's 2 divided by xb, it's 4 minus 0. So we have negative 2 divided by 4, which is actually negative 1 over 2. So we are done with the first step. We calculated our gradient. We can go ahead and generate our equation. For us to generate the equation, we are going to use the very same equation we used to calculate the gradient, which is the equation to calculate the gradient. And then we need the gradient and 1 point on top of that graph. So remember, we have point A and point B, so we only need 1 point. How are we going to do this? If you cross multiply this, we are going to have y minus y1 is equals to m x minus x1. So in this case, we have this, and we have this. Our given points, it's A, which is 0 maps 2, B, which is 4 maps 0. So it doesn't matter which point you're going to choose, the answers will be the same. So suppose we use point A, so it's y minus, what is the y coordinate of point A? It's 2, so we put 2, it's equals to, our gradient is negative 1 over 2, x minus, what is the coordinate? It's actually 0. Then from here, we standardize. Negative 1 over 2 multiplied by x, it's negative 1 over 2x. Negative 1 over 2 multiplied by negative 0, it's 0. And then from here, we have something like this. Then transposing this to the other side, we have y, it's equals to negative 1 over 2 x plus 2. Then this is your equation. There is another way. It's a bit longer than this one, but let us do it. If you don't understand this one, maybe you can understand that one better than this one. For the second method, we also need the gradient and 1 point on top of that graph. So in our case, we know that the gradient is actually negative 1 over 2 x plus c. So 1 point, let us use point B, which is 4 maps 0. So this is x, this is y. Where we see y, we substitute by 0, it's equals to this 0. Negative 1 over 2, our x is 4 plus c. So basically we are calculating the value of c. So negative 1 over 2 multiplied by 4, it's actually negative 4 over 2 plus c. We have 0 is equals to negative 2 plus c. Transposing this to the other side, c is equals to 2. And then we go back to this equation, x plus c. Where we see c, we simply substitute our calculated answer, plus 2. That's it for this lesson video. This is Wahula SJ. Thank you very much.